Good afternoon, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Olive, you just got on an airplane at Jacksonville International Airport and you're on your way home. We had a great time hanging out with you. You have quite a voice. You're 3 months old now, and you have the voice of a fully grown person. And you like to use that voice. You like to let people know that you have a problem. The only thing is that nobody knows what the problem is. It can be one of just a few things, but you have to figure them out. And you're not patient while they're figuring it out. But that's okay because you're just a little baby. I'm sure you will grow out of these things pretty quickly. And hopefully for your parents, you will. So I've done a lot of fairy tales from Grimm, and they're from storybooks for little kids, but Grimm fairy tales are not necessarily for kids. The brothers Grimm went around. It's parts of Germany, I think, like the eastern part of Western Europe, and gathered folk tales together, put them into a volume of fairy tales, folk tales, and published it. And this was a long time ago. I'm not here to tell you exactly what they did and why they did it and all that other stuff. It's just a little bit of background. But those books that I've been reading you are kids' fairy tale books with big pictures and stuff. And I could show the pictures on screen either by turning the book around to you or just going online like we're doing here. But the pictures are on there. Consequently, I was also reading the um, the fairy tales by Grimm, adults edition, the original English translation. I'm sure it was written in German. And so I read a lot of the same fairy tales, and some of them are pretty bizarre. Like Hansel and Gretel, they take them out in the woods to try to lose them. And that's their kids. You would never take your kids out to the woods to try to lose them. And if you did, you wouldn't tell anybody. So these were folk tales from all over the place, and they are, some of them have morals, and some of them have bizarre twists, and some of them have weird endings. But as I was going through, one of them stuck out as truly bizarre. Just and these are fantasy type things. These are tales that never were written down until these guys went around and asked people. So they'd go into a village and say, "Hey, tell us the stories that you tell each other when you're sitting around a campfire," that kind of thing. And so when we in modern day America sit around a campfire, we tell tales, and you would have to read up and say, okay, what are the folk tales that people tell? And then you tell a scary story, or you might make something up. But these stories were actually passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. And these guys went around and captured these stories in writing and published them. So this must be the 108th. I don't remember how many of these there are, but there's a ton of them, and I think the book is 400 and or maybe 630 pages, and I'm on 610, so I'm practically done. I doubt if I'm going to come across one that's any more bizarre than this one. I'm not going to read all of these to you. It just wouldn't make sense. But this one is just so funny. It's called Hans My Hedgehog by Jacob and William Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a peasant who had money and land enough, but as rich as he was, there was still something missing from his happiness. Now, usually when you think of a peasant, you don't think of somebody with money, but some of them did have money. By peasant, they're just talking about somebody of the lower class. He had no children with his wife. Often, when he went to the city with the other peasants, they would mock him and ask him why he had no children. He finally became angry, and when he returned home, he said, I will have a child, even if it's a hedgehog. And a hedgehog is this little animal with spikes coming out of the head. Your parents played Sonic the Hedgehog. For all I know, Tom still has a Sonic the Hedgehog, although you may be familiar with Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a character from a video game. Then his wife had a baby, and the top half was a hedgehog, and the bottom half a boy. When she saw the baby, she was horrified. Not really horrified. I can't imagine giving birth to a hedgehog. It would be a little painful. Now see what you've wished upon us. The man said, it cannot be helped. The boy must be baptized, but we cannot ask anyone to be his godfather. So they would baptize children so that if they died, they would get into heaven. That's kind of a it's a myth in Christianity. You don't have to be baptized to get into heaven, but it's what a lot of people believed. But we cannot ask anyone to be his godfather. Now, in Christianity, in certain parts of Christianity, you have a godmother and a godfather. And I had my aunt, my mom's sister was my godmother. And my godfather was, I think, my Uncle Bob. I don't know. And so what would happen is if your parents died, you would go to your godfather, and they had made a promise in the church that they would raise you to be a Christian. That's why it's called Godfather. That you would tell them about God, tell them about the Bible. The woman said, and the only name that we can give him is Hans My Hedgehog. So they didn't even give him the family name, whatever that was. When he was baptized, the pastor said, because of his quills, he cannot be given an ordinary bed. So they put a little straw behind the stove and laid him in it. And he could not drink from his mother, for he would have stuck her with his quills, so he couldn't breastfeed. He lay there behind the stove for 8 years, and his father grew tired of him and thought, if only he would die. But he did not die, but just lay there. Isn't that horrible? He said, man, I want a kid, even if he's a hedgehog. And then he got his wish. Now it happened that there was a fair in the city, and the peasant wanted to go. He asked his wife what he should bring her. So he's just saying, I'm going to the fair. What do you want me to bring back for you? A little meat, some bread rolls, and things for the household, she said. Then he asked the servant girl, and she wanted a pair of slippers and some fancy stockings. So this isn't even his relative. This is somebody that works for him, the servant girl. Finally, he also said, Hans, my hedgehog, what would you like? Father, he said, bring me some bagpipes. So he's going to be a bagpipe playing hedgehog. Sorry, but my voice is going. I'm getting ready to go in and have cataract surgery in the morning. Hopefully they won't go like, man, why is your voice like this? You sound like you have a cold. When Hans my Hedgehog had them, he said, Father, oh, wait a minute. When the peasant returned home, he gave his wife what he had bought for her, meat and bread rolls. Then he gave the servant girl the slippers and fancy stockings, and finally he went behind the stove and gave Hans my Hedgehog the bagpipes. When Hans my Hedgehog had them, he said, Father, go to the blacksmiths. And the blacksmith is somebody who makes things out of iron. They melt iron and bang it with a hammer and make it into things like horseshoes. And have my cock rooster shod. So he's talking about a chicken, a male chicken. Then I will ride away and never come back. The father was happy to get rid of him, so he had his rooster shod. So he had shoes put on his rooster. I should have mentioned that before. Shod means to put shoes on. And when it was done, Hans my Hedgehog climbed on it and rode away. He took pigs and donkeys with him to tend in the forest. In the forest, the rooster flew into a tall tree with him. There he sat and watched over the donkeys and the pigs. He sat there for years until finally the herd had grown large. His father knew nothing about him. While sitting in the tree, he played his bagpipes and made beautiful music. One day a king came by. He was lost and heard the music. He was amazed to hear it and sent a servant to look around and see where it was coming from. He looked here and there, but only saw a little animal sitting high in a tree. It looked like a rooster up there with a hedgehog sitting on it making the music. So he's not just in the tree, he's sitting on his rooster, which is what he rides. And the rooster's sitting in the tree. So it's like the song that I did in the Sleepy Time lullabies. Me up on my pony, on my boat. The king said to the servant that he should ask him why he was sitting there, and if he knew the way back to his kingdom. Then Hans my Hedgehog climbed down from the tree and told him that he would show him the way if the king would promise in writing to give him the first thing that greeted him at the royal court upon his arrival home. The king thought, I can do that easily enough. Hans my Hedgehog cannot understand writing, and I can put down what I want to. Then the king took his pen and ink and wrote something, and after he had done so, Hans my Hedgehog showed him the way, and he arrived safely at home. His daughter saw him coming from afar and was so overjoyed that she ran to meet him and kissed him. He thought about Hans my Hedgehog because he's Hans thinks he gets the first thing that he sees when he gets there, and it's his daughter. He would get his daughter as a wife, and he's a half hedgehog guy. He thought about Hans my Hedgehog and told her what had happened, that he was supposed to have promised the first thing that greeted him to a strange animal that rode a rooster and made beautiful music. But instead he had written that this would not happen, for Hans my Hedgehog could not read. The princess was happy about this and said that it was a good thing, for she would not have gone with him in any event. So even though he promised it, she's like, no, I'm not going with that dude. Like, if you promise something like that, I ain't going. Hans my Hedgehog tended the donkeys and pigs, was of good cheer, and sat in the tree blowing on his bagpipes. Now it happened that another king came this way with his servants and messengers. He too got lost and did not know his way back home because the forest was so large. He too heard the beautiful music from afar and asked one of his messengers to go and see what it was and where it was coming from. The messenger ran to the tree where he saw Hans my Hedgehog astride the cock rooster. The messenger asked him what he was doing up there. I am tending my donkeys and pigs. What is it that you want? Replied Hans my Hedgehog. The messenger said that they were lost and could not find their way back to their kingdom, and asked him if he could not show them the way. And that's just a weird way of doing it, but you know, it's the same as saying, "Could you show me the way?" You know, asked him if he could not show him the way. Then Hans my Hedgehog climbed down from the tree with his rooster and told the old king that he would show him the way if he would give him the first thing that give him the thing that he first met at home before the royal castle. The king said yes and signed a promise to Hans my Hedgehog. When that was done, Hans my Hedgehog rode ahead on his rooster, showing them the way, and the king safely reached his kingdom. When the king arrived at his court, there was great joy. Now he had an only daughter who was very beautiful. She ran out to him, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed him, and was ever so happy that her old father had returned. She asked him where he had been during his long absence, and he told her how he had lost his way and almost not made it home again, but that as he was making his way through a great forest, he had come upon a half hedgehog, half human, astride a rooster sitting in a tall tree and making beautiful music, who had shown him the way, but whom he had promised would ever first met him at the royal court, and it was she herself, and he was terribly sorry. So it's the same thing, but this time it looks like he signed something that said that he would give him that. But she promised that she would go with him when he came for the love of her old father. Hans my Hedgehog tended his pigs, and the pigs had more pigs until there were so many that the whole forest was full. Then Hans my Hedgehog let his father know that they should empty out all the stalls in the village, because he was coming with such a large herd of pigs that everyone who wanted would be able to take part in the slaughter. So he's gonna bring these pigs there. They're gonna kill them all, and then they're gonna have all this meat. So you'd think Dad would be pretty happy, but no. It saddened the father to hear this, for he thought that Hans my Hedgehog had long since died. But Hans my Hedgehog mounted his cock rooster, drove the pigs ahead of himself into the village, and had them butchered. What a slaughter! What a commotion! They could hear the noise 2 hours away. Afterward, Hans my Hedgehog said, "Father, have my cock rooster shod a second time at the blacksmith's. Then I will ride away and not come back again as long as I live." So the father had the cock rooster shod and was happy that Hans my Hedgehog was not coming back. So let's see what happens. Hans my Hedgehog rode into the first kingdom. The king had ordered that if anyone should approach who was carrying bagpipes and riding on a rooster, that he should be shot at, struck down, and stabbed to prevent him from entering the castle. So for my brother Richard, it's beaten, stabbed, and beaten, I think was what it said on the news. Thus, when Hans my Hedgehog rode up, they attacked him with bayonets, but he spurred his rooster on, flew over the gate, and up to the king's window. Landing there, he shouted to him to give him what he had promised, or it would cost him and his daughter their lives. Then the king told the princess to go out to him in order to save his life and her own as well. She put on a white dress, and her father gave her a carriage with 6 horses, magnificent servants, money, and property. She climbed aboard, and Hans my Hedgehog took his place beside her with his rooster and bagpipes. They said farewell and drove off. The king thought that he would never see them again. However, it did not go as he thought it would, for when they had traveled a short distance from the city, Hans my Hedgehog pulled off her beautiful clothes and stuck her with his quills until she was bloody all over. This is the reward for your deceit. Go away. I do not want you. With that, he sent her back home, and she was cursed as long as she lived. Ah, Hans my Hedgehog, astride his cock rooster and carrying his bagpipes, rode on to the second kingdom, where he had also helped the king find his way. This one, in contrast, had ordered that if anyone looking like Hans my Hedgehog should arrive, he should be saluted and brought to the royal castle with honors and with military escort. When the princess saw him, she was horrified because he looked so strange, but she thought that nothing could be done about it because she had promised her father to go with him. She welcomed Hans my Hedgehog, and they were married. Then he was taken to the royal table, and she sat next to him while they ate and drank. That evening, when it was time to go to bed, she was afraid of his quills, but he told her to have no fear, for he would not hurt her. He told her the old uh, he, he told the old king to have 4 men keep watch by their bedroom door. They should make a large fire. He said that he would take off his hedgehog skin after going into the bedroom and before getting into bed. The men should immediately pick it up and throw it into the fire, and then stay there until it was completely consumed by the fire. When the clock struck 11, he went to the bedroom, took off his hedgehog skin, and laid it down by the bed. The men rushed in, grabbed it, and threw it on the fire, and as soon as the fire consumed it, he was redeemed, and he lay there in bed entirely in the shape of a human. But he was black as coal, as though he had been charred. The king sent for his physician, who washed him with good salves and balms. Then he became white and was a handsome young gentleman. So I don't think this is a racist thing. I'm sure that the people in this area of the world saw black people. There was a lot of trade going on by people around the world. Maybe if you were a peasant in a little village, you would run into anybody who didn't look like you. But I'm thinking that this is more like this is grime or something on them. Like I don't think it's a black and white the way that we talk about. When the princess saw what had happened, she was overjoyed, and they got up and ate and drank. Now their wedding was celebrated for real, and Hans my Hedgehog inherited the old king's kingdom. Some years later, he traveled with his wife to his father and said that he was his son. But the father said that he did not have a son. He had had one, but he had been born with quills like a hedgehog and gone off into the world. Then he said that he was the one, and the old father rejoiced and returned with him to his kingdom. Man, I would have brought that guy back to the kingdom and given him the guillotine. And then it ends with this little poem. My tale is done and has gone to Gushtin's home. Peace out, guys.